Please be seated. Well, if that isn't a gospel reading for April Fools, I don't know what is. We're all singing Alleluia, and he's risen, and the women are terrified and amazed, and they don't say anything to anybody. Yeah, April Fools. It doesn't really seem like a very happy Easter morning. They didn't get all dressed up. They didn't have flowers and brass. They didn't celebrate the way we are. They were scared, and they wanted to run away. Come on down. Have a seat right here. I was going to, say a little something about this was the debut of performance for Rolling Stones, but I didn't want to go there. So kids, come here for a second. When I was little, I had a cousin who was 13 years older than I, much bigger. And she had married very young to an artist. She was an artist, and her husband was an artist. And I loved to go visit Vicki and Chuck, because you never quite knew what you'd find at their house. Like, they had a pet iguana. Have you ever had a pet iguana? I didn't. I thought that was pretty cool. And they had a big cage full of lovebirds. That was fun to watch. But the kind of most amazing part was you'd stand in their living room when you walked in their door, and there on a big scaffold, just free and easy, were some ginormous parrots. Just parrot. A big old... I know, all colorful and just up there. You kind of thought they did live in the jungle. Yeah. But when they sent me something, I always paid attention. And this particular time, I opened a box with my name on it. I was so excited. And I opened it, and it didn't look very exciting. It was about this big, and it was brown, and it kind of looked fragile, like if I crushed it, I could. But I didn't. I was just kind of curious. It was a cocoon, and the instructions said, tie it to a houseplant and wait.
Was there a butterfly in it?
Good question. I didn't know what was in it for sure, but I would go and I'd water that plant every week. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And finally, one time when I looked, it was empty. And I looked all the way inside and there was no butterfly in it. It was just empty. Empty. There was nothing there. Can you imagine how disappointed I was?
Nothing in it.
Nothing in it. Empty, empty, empty as a tomb, empty. Boring. But then, guess what? I looked around just a little bit, and guess what I saw?
A butterfly.
A butterfly is right, about this big. And this butterfly was softly opening and closing its wings, drying them out, and eventually it would fly and we'd let it go outside and fly away. That was pretty cool. But you know what? As long as I was looking inside that empty cocoon, I missed the butterfly. I missed the best part.
You wanted to catch it?
Yep, I did. I did want to catch it, that's true. Can you imagine? We talked about this morning about the women who went to the tomb looking for the body of Jesus. They were sad, right? He had died, and they didn't know what to do. And what'd they find? Did they find him? Nope, not this morning. It was empty, 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 like that cocoon was empty. And they were scared. But the person in white, who wasn't Jesus, told them, go ahead. Go to this place called Galilee. And in the story of Mark's gospel, Galilee was always the place of kind of shaky, scary uncertainty, a little chaos. There we'll see Jesus? Really? And the women went away just plain scared. They didn't know what to think, because all they could see was that empty tomb. But you know what? Later, they and the other people who had been so touched by Jesus in his lifetime, they realized that they could treat each other the way Jesus treated them. and treated the people around them, even the people they didn't think were supposed to be treated that way. And over time, they experienced Jesus by sharing with each other in the way that he had taught them. And guess what? Here, 2,000 years later, what do we say? Alleluia, Christ is risen. And it's not because it happened just to them. It's because it happens in our own lives all the time. So the next time something happens that breaks your heart, that feels like a terrible ending, something you're afraid of and scared of, remember that even out of every hard, challenging, painful thing that happens, God is at work bringing new life, bringing what we call resurrection. And what I want to give all of you this morning, well, not all of you, but all the kids, is a packet of butterfly wildflower seeds to remind you to look for the butterflies, the resurrection in life. Do you want to take it? I wouldn't open it, and there's something inside to open when you get home because you don't want to lose them here, okay? And hopefully you can find a little place to plant these and be looking for butterflies in your life, everywhere you go, all right? And remember, when you find something that looks empty, it's not, or it is, but there's something better coming. Yay! Here you go. You're welcome. Here you go. Did you get one? There you go. Easter's not an easy thing to talk about, is it? I mean, Christmas is a little easier. It's a baby, and there are lots of places you can, dress up like shepherds and angels and that kind of thing. But resurrection, it's sort of like, what's for lunch? What are we supposed to do with resurrection? It's hard. It's hard, but it's also good. So the experience that Jesus had with the people around him, he did two things. Walter Brueggemann talks about he was dismantling the pyramid of power that we human beings love to create. We put at the top people who have more capacity, more money, more control. And it's a top-down pyramid. And it doesn't work. It ends up in death for all of us. And Jesus entered in that, and he constantly went to the base of the pyramid and said, you're loved, you're included, you matter. Don't listen to the people who tell you otherwise. In your vulnerable, weak, limited way, you matter. And people followed him because they experienced something in his presence. And it was tangible. It was energizing. It was something they wanted more of. But in his death, he hangs on the cross and he says, why have you forsaken me? His disciples have fallen away. Peter has denied him, not once, but 3 times, and gone off weeping. He's been betrayed by someone with whom he journeyed and ate and laughed and cried. Even the women who were standing at a distance, when they come and they hear this news, they run away scared. Every single human around Jesus falls away. And his cry to God, why have you forsaken me, is the bottom of the bottom. Completely weak, completely vulnerable, completely limited, and dying alone and empty. And the disciples and the women and all those whose lives have been touched, it was over. It was over. All their hopes, all their dreams, the desire to have Rome finally crushed, and there a new Israel to take hold, it was empty. But they should have known, because the psalm that he quoted was Psalm 22, and even though it talks about pain and suffering, it ends with God's victory, with an awareness that God is not done here, that even death cannot win, that the pyramid of power is empty. It's the lie, just like that empty tomb. Something is dismantled in his death, and something new is emerging, is energized. But the women are staring at what was. They can't yet see what is. And most of us, when our lives are breaking open, when we're suffering and hurting, we can't see what's coming. We can only see what's being lost. But there is where we proclaim the good news, right there. In the face of all that is lost, it is there that something is happening, and that something isn't dependent on human ability. It's not dependent on our getting it. It's already done in spite of us. Forget our failures. Forget our inability to get it. It's already happened. Did you notice that it said the sun was risen? Did you notice that it was Jesus who was raised? It didn't say that Jesus bounded up of his own accord, of his own strength. It was done unto him. We don't enter resurrection life here and now each time something ends by our own bootstraps. We don't get it by our own competence, by our own strength. We get it by allowing God to do something in us. And even when we don't allow God to do something in us, God is doing it anyway. The sun is coming up regardless of whether we're on board with that or not. You know, when a caterpillar dies, when a caterpillar goes through this process, it feels like death. It becomes mush inside that little cocoon. If you were to open it midway through, you'd see nothing except goo. But out comes this butterfly, this new life. And you wonder if a caterpillar could know that that was what was going to happen, how it would react. No, thanks. See, we're conscious. We know that things happen to us, that life falls apart, that relationships end, that dreams die. We know that we're frail and that any minute what we have can be taken away from us. But in our consciousness, we don't participate in it. We very often resist or hold on to what we did know, fearful of this process of letting go and becoming. And I have to tell you, some of you know I've been through some interesting health challenges in the last couple of months, and it has been excruciating because I haven't been able to go and do and be out of my competence, out of what I love to do. I've been helpless. I've been held back. I've been limited. And many of us in this room are limited in ways that aren't going to get better. And mine will eventually get better. And I'd really like to say that I was magnanimous in this process and cooperating with it and easily letting it go and having no problems with it. Guess what? It's been brutal because it's been hard for me to let go. And I keep trying to claw my way back, and guess what? Then something else happens, and I can't, and I can't, and I can't, and I hate it. And I don't know what God is bringing about in my life as a result of this, but it's not a pleasant process. There is always death in order for new life to emerge. And we're really good on the new life part. We're okay with that part. It's the death part we don't like. not in ourselves and not in each other. But that is what Jesus' message is all about. Befriend the weakness in you and in others. Befriend the pain and the struggle and the suffering, and allow it to take place. Allow it to happen unto you. Jean Vanier started the L'Arche communities for those who are challenged in various ways, physically or mentally. He says at first he hated people who had challenges like that because it scared him and it made him feel uncomfortable, and he didn't want to be near people who struggled or who were different than he. But eventually, he was willing to put that discomfort aside and become a part of a small community with people who had challenges. And he talks about the power of tenderness, the power that isn't a pyramid top-down, but is a meeting in the middle, a meeting of belonging, of love, of acceptance, that's not based on your capacity or skill or bank account or anything else, but the vulnerable place of belonging to one another, of risking being in love and loving. And he talks about how these communities of transformation are places of light and joy that those of us who aren't a part of them can't even fathom. But they are springing up all over our world. And there's one businessman who said, I should have you list out what makes these communities, and we'll replicate them all over. We'll just change the world by doing that. And he's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. Because what happens is you have to be experiencing the transformation in order for you to embody it. And that is what the early Christian communities were about. They interacted with each other after Jesus' death in the way that Jesus interacted with them, and it changed lives. And it spread from one little community of unbelievable sense of belonging and freedom and joy to the next, in spite of persecution, in spite of all the odds against them. They didn't set out to start a movement, they ran away in fear. But eventually they remembered and held the power of love to break through the pyramid of power and transform hearts. May we too risk saying yes to the power of resurrection in our lives. Wherever we find ourselves, may we be willing to embrace the vulnerability and weakness in ourselves and in each other, that we may rise with Jesus over and again. May we be the community of belonging and share that experience not only with each other, but with those with whom we interact. It may look empty, but alleluia, Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia.